We basically get driven from two directions. We get driven for planning from the finance part perspective of locking down our budget. And then we also get driven from a longer cadence that's a little bit more on the commercial side, planning out what our targets are for next year, where we feel like we've been weak, what types of marketing activities we feel like we have a lot of potential. Usually we'll do a series of offsites on the executive level and then on the individual business unit levels, and then sending out the general objectives to the individual team members, letting them come up with their initiatives. We use an OKR methodology, letting them come up with their initiatives, and then folding that back up as we roll up into the long-term planning. I think there's always going to be some misalignment. I don't try to necessarily hit 100%, and I try to recognize that. The number one thing for me is really just to make sure that from the technology and the process perspective, we have visibility to know what's coming in and what's the result of that. I'm very allergic to vanity metrics. Slowly every year we take another metric of, organic website traffic, for example, off of our planning and try to turn that into SQL or MQL or speed of return on ad spend for paid ads or conversion rates for paid versus brand versus partner. Really trying to figure out what are the KPIs that turn the needle. So I think the first part of the alignment is really processes, or making sure that whatever the tool is, whether CRM or spreadsheets, whatever it is, that we know exactly what happens to the different leads that we bring, and we know what ends up happening to them. Because working without a feedback loop is impossible, right? It's like playing darts without being able to see where you land on the dartboard. So making sure that I either have that direct line of communication with the sales team, and hopefully not just on the senior level, but that people on my team have the right relationships with the people on their level, and that we're getting the feedback from every single person there. That's really important. The second thing is making sure that where we feel like there's a role for marketing to insert itself, we do, but that we also recognize we don't need to be an intrinsic part of the sales process for every type of sale that we make. So when we do something that's a little bit more B2C, we basically own almost every touch point. When you're talking about a B to enterprise, it's okay for us to do sales enablement, provide the right collateral, make sure that the collateral is actually useful. So for example, sit through a demo call that a salesperson is doing and see which of the slide decks they breeze through and which they don't. And maybe if you sit in another call and you see that differs across different salespeople, maybe come up with a way to make more modular content so each salesperson can roll their own rather than forcing them to stay away. So I think that process feedback loop is important. On the technology side, making sure that there's alignment with how you're using your CRM and how you're pushing people through the funnel, that you have the right platforms to share content with the different sales teams members, keeping them in the loop about new content that you're putting out. If you're putting out research, but they don't have it, then you're totally missing out on the nurture component of content. So I think the technology and the process works really hand in hand, and then making sure that the KPIs are aligned as well. So that's what I said before about, I don't want my KPI to be driven towards MQLs, whereas those leads aren't actually converting, or my KPI is to be driven around our group level brand presence, which might not have any impact, to be honest, on the actual sales leads that we get. So I think a big part of that is around alignment on the KPIs as well. The way that we try to build it, we will define our marketing KPIs, at least on the B to large B level. We'll look at the sales KPIs, and together with the sales team, we'll look at our historical conversion rates and the different channels that we get, and we'll try to extrapolate our marketing KPIs from there. So in some cases, they're actually like hardcore driven by the sales KPIs. And a big part of the goal, I would say probably anywhere from 50 to 80%, depending on the year and depending on the product and business unit of our KPIs, are totally driven by revenue and by the sales team's goals rather than marketing alone. We actually have, because we have so many different types of products, and one type of our product might have a 1.5-year sales cycle, and one might have 6 months, and one might have 1 month, and one might be instant. It's hard. I'll give you that. It's very hard. On the enterprise side, Fortune 500 companies, we almost have surrendered that effort from a point of you get diminishing returns when you try to measure everything and to drive yourself to the point where you're getting full visibility. On the enterprise sales, what we might look at is how many sales qualified leads are we dragging in? Historically, we know that maybe we've gotten a 10% conversion rate or 5% conversion rate, and just leave it at that. Leave it at a very fast feedback loop from sales qualified lead and just be okay with that. When we get to the higher volume, lower revenue things that we sell, like on our freight marketplace for small businesses, there it comes down to data. We basically look at historical cohort rates. We'll come up with a gate so that we can, for example, take a cohort from, I'll make this up, but take a cohort of users that signed up in January 2018, see how they aged over the course of that entire year, and then look back and see, okay, what percentage of that cohort, of the cohort that eventually converted in the first month, what percentage converted in the first week? And then you compare that with a couple of other cohorts and you figure, where does it differ? Because we initially had done that, and then we realized, wait, there's a huge dynamic that's different between cohorts that we have in Q3 and cohorts that we have in Q1, depending on their budget spend. So then we took that as a model and we challenged other cohorts with that same model, and we figured out which one actually checks out across as many models as possible. It turns out our month cohort, our first monthly cohort, we have very strong data into what percentage of that cohort will convert in the first month, which means that within a month, I'll know my anticipated return on ad spend duration, and I'll know my actual revenue from that specific cohort once it's aged a little bit. First of all, I think some of them are valuable in their own right, especially for a startup. So to a certain extent, branded search, branded organic search, mainstream publication mentions, I really try to split the PR and brand activities that we do into two separate buckets. One of them is there to drive ROI, and one of them is not. So a partnership PR that we put out, or a press release about a specific feature, which is really a by intent brand activity. For me, the KPI would be, do I see a significant change on the relevant landing page or the relevant product page on our website in the first week or two? And that's where I hold myself to account. But there's an entire category of brand activities that are never going to drive that ROI and shouldn't have to drive that ROI. And being able to recognize that just because you're doing PR for both of them doesn't mean that you're looking for the same goals. So employer branding, for example, you might look for, once you started doing that type of activity, over 6 months, you start to see more familiarity for the HR team when they reach out to people. So you start seeing more people applying for jobs. On the mainstream side of things, it's a little bit tautological, but sometimes the best marker of successful brand identity is getting more inbound PR. So once you get data somewhere and you get a snowball effect of more publications reaching out to you, and they trigger more people reaching out to you, so you almost get this very positive feedback loop that shows you that more people are getting in front of you. But I try to separate it and say, I don't need to get KPI ROI off every single one of these. And depends on where you are in the company lifecycle. Sometimes you'll dial one up and sometimes you'll dial it down. Like I had a conversation with one of our board members a couple of years ago, when we were very much focused on selling our SaaS product. I said, hey man, listen, if it's okay with you, I'm not going to get this year, I'm not going to get any TechCrunch publications. I'm not going to get Wall Street Journal. I know that I get more product leads when I get picked up in Journal of Commerce or American Shipper or Air Cargo News than if I get in Wall Street Journal or in Bloomberg. And we don't need that right now. What we need is product leads. So being sure that you're being directed by the right brand goal and then being able to convert. So we use our Office BI tool to do management of it. So we use Domo, a little bit similar to Tableau. So we use that for our general budget management. Marketing specifically, I think, ends up hitting the budget much harder. Like we have a lot of smaller expenses coming in on a regular basis. So a lot of SaaS tools, paid advertising spend. So usually what we'll do is we'll use spreadsheets that pull in the real-time spend from the different platforms, or integrations that pull in the spend from the real-time integration platform, and then just look where it is. And I do a monthly check-in with our finance team to see, where are we on the budget side? Where are we on the spend side? Are we spending too much? Are we spending too little? And are we okay from an actual target perspective?